Today on Family Talk.
Welcome, everyone, to this Friday edition of Family Talk. I'm Roger Marsh, your faithful announcer, filling in today behind the microphone for your host, psychologist and best-selling author, Dr. James Dobson. Technology and social media have become major fixtures for people living in the 21st century. Unfortunately, there are many negative aspects to the online world as well. Issues like pornography, trafficking, and cyberbullying are continuing to wreak havoc on our young people. Researchers estimate that over 3 billion people use the internet worldwide. That's nearly half of the world's population. With more and more people projected to be online, the church has a tremendous opportunity to spread the gospel to a lost world on this platform. That's why today's broadcast is so important, and that's what it's focused on. In just a moment, you're going to hear Dr. Tim Clinton's fascinating conversation with Nona Jones. Nona is an incredible woman of God who works for one of the largest companies in the world, that is Facebook. Her job is to build faith-based communities online and to help grow the digital church. Nona also has a powerful testimony of finding God through a deeply troubling childhood. Well, with all that said, here now is Dr. Tim Clinton to further introduce today's guest on this edition of Family Talk.
Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Tim Clinton. I'm at the 2019 National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Anaheim, California. I'm joined right now by a very special guest. Her name is Nona Jones. You're going to really love her. She leads what's called now the Global Faith-Based Partnerships at Facebook. In a moment, we're going to talk about the growth of the online church and how the digital world is impacting Christianity and more. She's an active leader alongside of her husband, Pastor Timothy Jones Sr. at Open Door Ministries in Gainesville, Florida. She's an author, speaker, a gospel artist, and a proud mother of 2 boys. You can tell she's a hard-working woman with a genuine heart for the Lord. Nona, I'm so excited you've joined us today for what I think is a really, really important topic. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is my honor.
As we get started, Nona, I wanted to go back. Everybody has a story, and what's interesting about yours is you've got some real brokenness back in your past, and God did some work in you, and I think it sets the stage for who you are and where God's called you to now. Yeah. You mind sharing a little bit about what it was like growing up and some of the abuse that you went through?
Sure. So I think the way you said it is absolutely right. I think there's always a story behind what may seem to be the success. And so I was born in the summer of 1982, and I was born to parents who had been married for about 15 years. My father actually wanted to have children, but my mom didn't. She grew up in a very traumatic situation herself, and I think that seeing what she saw made her decide that she didn't want to have children. And so when they had been married about 15 years, she found out she was pregnant, and she actually cried. She did not want to be a mom. She wanted life to be one long party. And so she told my dad, and she was very angry. But he was excited. You know, he wanted to be a dad so bad. And so he was really, really glad. But about halfway through her pregnancy, he started to experience some stomach cramps. And he went to the doctor and asked them to run some tests. And sadly, when the results came back, he was diagnosed with terminal stomach cancer. And he was given 6 months to live. So if you can imagine, you know, you wait 15 years to finally have a child, and now you're literally facing your mortality. And so despite being given 6 months to live, he actually fought really, really hard, and he lived until 2 months shy of my 2nd birthday. Basically, my memories of him are all reflected in photos because I don't remember him tangibly. But shortly after his funeral, my mom actually moved us to Florida. I was born in New Jersey. She moved us to Florida. And she was following after a guy that she met, and, you know, she thought that relationship would take off, but it didn't. And so between the ages of about 2 and 4, she had a string of boyfriends that came in and out of her life and in and out of my life. And when I was about 5, she met a guy who became her live-in boyfriend. And shortly afterward, he began to abuse me sexually. And I told her about a year later, because he did it a few times, and he always said that, you know, if I told her what he did, that she would get rid of me, or, you know, he basically made me think that she was going to be upset with me. And so I finally built up the courage to tell her what happened, and she had him arrested, and I was so grateful to have him gone. But then on the day of his release, or near the time of his release, she actually asked me if I would feel okay with him coming back. And of course I said no. I was about 7 at that time. But she said that, we need money in the house. And she told me that she was the adult. And so she was bringing him back. And so she actually took me with her to the jail to pick him up and brought him back to the house. And so the abuse continued shortly after he got back. And I remember feeling so helpless, and I remember feeling so worthless that I decided to attempt to end my life. And even though I was young, I had been watching a talk show once where they were talking about hidden dangers in homes. And there was a toddler who died after being poisoned from drinking bleach. And so I actually attempted to do that. And my mom didn't have any bleach, though. She only had laundry detergent. So I drank this laundry detergent. And I was probably about, 8 years old or so, 8 or 9. And instead of killing me, it just made me throw up all night long. And I was really disappointed, actually, because I thought that life would be better if I wasn't here. And so I went to school, and I was acting out in school, and I got labeled as a problem child, and all these just negative, stereotypes were thrown at me. And nobody ever asked me, like, why are you behaving this way? No one ever asked me that. They just labeled me. And then about a year later, I decided to attempt to commit suicide again because the abuse was happening. And I tried to slit my wrists because I think it was a movie or something where somebody killed themselves that way. And so you can even see now, I still have a scar from when I tried to do it that second time. And it didn't work because apparently I missed my artery. So I see the grace of God in that, where God was literally protecting me and he was saving my life when I didn't even think it was worth saving. And when I was about 11, I was in the 6th grade, a friend of mine invited me to go to church with her. And before that, I had never heard of God or church or the Bible or anything. My mom was not a religious person at all. But I went to church, and that very first Sunday, I remember walking inside, and people loved me and welcomed me who didn't even know me. They didn't know I had attempted suicide twice. They just welcomed me because I was there. And the very first sermon I ever heard preached was about God being a father to the fatherless. And I had always wanted my dad. I felt like if my father was there, that I wouldn't have gone through what I went through. And so it was that preacher saying that actually piqued my interest. I was like, well, who is this God? How is God a father? And I started to study the Word of God for myself, beginning at the age of 11.
Did you?
Yeah, and I accepted Jesus as Lord of my life around the age of 12, and never looked back. I will tell you that the trauma from my past definitely had ripple effects in my life, because that abuse created feelings of worthlessness. It created feelings of insecurity and inadequacy. But the more that I've discovered the identity that I had in God, the more I realized that I was actually worth something to him. And I think that began to help me heal from the pain of my past. So there's definitely a story there, but I know that it's faith that has brought me to where I am today.
No, it takes a lot of healing work to move beyond that kind of a story. Mm-hmm. But obviously God was writing something special in your heart and upon your life. Let's move forward a few years. You at the University of Florida.
Mm-hmm. So the amazing thing is, I often say that I feel like the Holy Spirit gave me wisdom that I didn't even understand at that time. Because after I accepted Jesus as Savior, I decided that I wanted to live up to his expectations of me. I started to pay attention in school. I started to do my schoolwork. I eventually got elevated to honors classes and advanced classes, and I became a very high-performing student. I got a full scholarship to the University of Florida. And I remember, when I was going through all of this trauma at home, I remember praying and being like, God, I just want you to get me out of this, because if you can get me out of this, then I can serve you without all the distractions of the anger and the dysfunction. And so I got the full scholarship to UF based on my academic performance. I was incredibly blessed, and I started school there as a microbiology and cell science major.
Really?
Yeah, I wanted to become a physician. I wanted to study cancer because I wanted to heal cancer. And it's funny how things happen, because my second year, I did a research project with the National Institutes of Health. And my project sponsor was a physician who had been at it for 30 years. And he asked me, he was like, why do you want to be a doctor? And I said, because I want to give people hope and I want to like be their partner in health and, and all this. I had like these bright eyes and I was like, I'm going to do this amazing work. And he was like, yeah, that's not what we do. He was like, it's all about the science. It's about the data. And so he basically threw this huge wet blanket on my like optimism. And so I changed my major.
Really?
To
From that
communications.
conversation?
Just from that one conversation. Wow. Yeah. And some people would look at it and be like, oh my gosh, he dashed your dreams. But in actuality, I believe that was the hand of God. Like he was creating a detour because frankly, if I had gone to medical school, I don't think I'd be sitting here talking to you right now. I just don't. I believe that God was orchestrating my path and my purpose through that detour.
Fast forward us to a really fascinating part of your life. You are involved in business, corporate America. You wind up quitting a job and something happens. Something radical happens.
Yeah. So my last job was a job I thought I would be in for the rest of my life. I was at the chief executive level of a statewide network of alternative schools in Florida. And these were schools for girls who had experienced trauma and who had been expelled or suspended from their regular school because of it.
The story.
It was exactly, yes. And I was like, I'm going to be here forever. Well, I was 4 years into that role when God spoke in my spirit. He said, this assignment is over. And I had been praying because there were some cultural things that were happening at the office that made me feel a little uncomfortable. Like people were undermining each other. There was lying happening and all that. I was like, God, what is going on? And he literally said, this assignment is over. And I said, okay, well, Lord, if this assignment is over, what do you want me to do next? The only thing he told me was to resign at the end of the fiscal year, which was June 30th of 2017. And so I met with my boss that day at 1:00 p.m. We were out of town. And I wasn't going to meet with her that day because I was like, well, we're out of town. I don't want to do it. But God said, I told you what to do it. So I met with her, gave her this letter. We finished talking at like 1:40 and I got back in my car and I was driving home. And at 2:05, 25 minutes later, I saw my cell phone ring and the Spirit said, take that call. I was like, oh boy, here we go. So I answered it, fully expecting a telemarketer. This woman goes, hi, is this Nona Jones? And I said, yeah. And she said, I'm calling from Facebook. Do you have a few minutes? And I was like, Facebook doesn't call people.
No.
Who is this wasting my minutes, right? Yeah. And she said, no, really. And she said, I don't know if you know this, but, last week, Mark changed the mission of our company to focus on community building. And one of the communities that we want to focus on are communities of faith. And we were told to give you a call because you'd be somebody who might be interested in helping us with this. I was just like, okay, just send me some information, whatever. So I get home and I check my email and there's a job description in my email. And I was like, all right, Lord, I hear you. I said, okay.
Talk to me about some of the responsibilities you have with Facebook. What's the goal? I mean, obviously, this is a whole new world for them. Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot to talk about here.
Sure. So for context purposes, so for the first 10 years of the company's existence, the mission was to make the world more open and connected. It was really all about just connecting family and friends with friends.
And that it's exploded. Just
it has grown incredibly. But then in 2017, we crossed the 2 billion user threshold. And that was about a quarter of the Earth's population. And I think Mark just had a moment of introspection where he was like, all right, we've got 2 billion people on our platform. What can we be doing with that actually matters? And I think it was at that moment that he realized that community building needed to be the next iteration of Facebook's existence. And so there was a study
focusing on friends and families primarily.
With the transition to community, yeah. We looked at, what are all of the different types of communities that exist? And we found there was, parenting, there's, recreation, there's health, there's all that. But the largest aggregate community are communities of faith. I think about 80% of the world's population ascribes to one of the 3 big faith traditions. And so I think the company really recognized that if you're going to be a platform that's about community, you have to serve communities of faith in a way that is meaningful to them. And so that's why my job was created.
You focus on what's called social ministry.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that and why it's important to all of us. You have a message of what you're hoping people will kind of move toward as they think about having influence online.
Certainly.
Because everybody's concerned about what's online.
Yeah. So the idea of social ministry is really all about using social technology to build God's kingdom, as opposed to using social technology to build an audience. It's a very different nuance. Most organizations think of social media as a broadcast channel. It's like, how do we build up our audience? How do we get more people looking at our stuff? And that's great, but at the end of the day, having an audience doesn't help if those people never find the Lord, right? And so social ministry is all about having a lens on discipleship. The way I define discipleship is all about relationship. It's maturing your faith in relationship with others. And I think the way that I often frame what I do is digital discipleship. It's really equipping churches and leaders to help people mature in their faith relationally in the digital space of Facebook as a social platform.
Yeah, you made this statement. You hope people will move beyond sharing godly content to doing something a little bit more.
Yeah, because it's not just about, sharing content about a ministry. It's really about making disciples through your ministry. I think that we're all made to be conduits of the gospel. Like, we're not just meant to build an audience. And the way that I think about it is just biblically, if you look at the life of Jesus, right? Like, he didn't use the 12 disciples to go, with flyers around, the cities and say, hey, come see Jesus at the temple on Sunday at 11, right? He didn't do that. What he did was he met people where they were. He taught people as he saw opportunity. He healed people as he came across their need. And I think what social technology allows you to do is meet people where they are. You don't have to say, hey, we're going to have a healing service on Friday at 7. I hope you can make it. You actually can pray for people when they say that moment, I need prayer. I just got a diagnosis of cancer. And you can have 300, 400, 1,000 people praying for you instantaneously.
That's technology.
Yeah.
The whole world's changed.
Absolutely.
A lot of people think about censorship up online. What's your take on all that? I think a lot of people want to hear.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that question. It's interesting because I think people sometimes don't know the vastness of the amount of content on our platform. So there are hundreds of millions to billions of pieces of content on the platform constantly. And what happens is we do have people who moderate content to make sure that it doesn't violate community standards. Things like, hate speech or things like harassment and things like that. But we also use what we call machine learning, which looks for signals on the platform of something that could potentially be risky. What has happened is there have been times where content has been flagged as a potential risk. And if that happens, it will get manually reviewed. And if the machine was wrong, it gets restored. I think what has happened is because of the volume, it seems like there's some sort of, campaign happening, but I can assure you that's not the case. I actually recently had to work with Franklin Graham.
I was going to bring up Franklin's situation because
I spoke with him. Yeah. I spoke with him. Yeah. As soon as I found out what happened, I called. I was like, wait a minute, let's see what's going on. But I can say even in that situation and others, when it comes down wrongly, like it gets restored. The goal of Facebook really is to be a conduit for the free flow of information and for people to be able to share their faith and to share their opinions and beliefs.
To Facebook's clear credibility here in this situation, they came back and apologized.
Yeah.
And immediately removed anything that felt or was censored, had been shut down in that moment. And Franklin was off. And I noticed that he posted a position on that too. Yeah.
And I mean, I think the thing that I want people to know is the reality is that's part of the reason why I'm here. That's why my position exists. I think that as a company, there are so many different viewpoints and lenses on things, and that's why it's really important to have people at the table, such as myself and others, who can actually speak and say, okay, well, this isn't actually what you may think. And we have those debates all the time internally, because it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and that's the thing that I ask people to realize is it really is difficult.
Now, I wanted to ask you on more of a practical level, let's
Sure.
talk about church communities.
Yeah.
Are you guys developing ways to facilitate growth, development, expansion, footprints of churches?
So this is the thing I'm most excited about, which is, so my role is both externally facing as well as internally facing. So my externally facing work really does work with leaders and organizations. Okay. Internally, I'm working with product teams across all of our different surfaces, whether it's pages, groups, live, events, events, et cetera, to try to build the tools that best serve communities of faith. So as an example, we've seen that many churches use Facebook Live to stream their weekend worship services.
Sure.
But, what happens after the live stream ends? It just ends and that's it. What I've worked with our product team to do is to build a functionality that will allow churches to add a join group button onto the Facebook live stream, because the Facebook groups platform is really the community building tool. If you think about your Facebook presence like a house, the page is the front porch. So that's the place where people can see what you're about on the surface. But the group is like the living room. That's the place that you invite people inside and they get to know you, you get to know them, they get to know each other. So by adding the join group button onto the live stream, you're literally taking people from like outside of your house into your house so that they can actually connect with your ministry and do more work together.
Now, I wanted to ask you too about families in particular. A lot of moms and dads are increasingly concerned about content online and the chaos of some games and stuff that is showing up on social media that really honestly petrifies parents.
Yeah.
What's your take on some of that? You getting an opportunity to have maybe a voice speak into some of that?
Yeah, I'm going to speak both in my kind of day job hat as well as my mom hat. I have 2 little boys. They're 9 and 6. And they both, even now, are like begging me for cell phones. And I'm like, absolutely not. I'm like, first of all, who are you going to call? Because I'm the only person that has a phone that But I do think that parents have to be vigilant. The reality is, and that's part of the reason why content moderation is such a challenge for us as a company, is because there are people on our platform who don't have the best intentions. And so we do try to make sure that the platform is safe. We have an integrity team that's entirely dedicated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to pulling down questionable and objectionable content, things that promote violence or harm or anything like that. So we have a team that's actually doing that. And so my recommendation to parents is definitely stay involved with your kids and see what they're doing on social. Make sure that you approve. Make sure that you teach them. We know biblically, if you train a child in the way they should go, they won't stray from it. But the truth is, you have to also inspect what you expect and make sure that you're leading your children there too.
Well, certainly, Nona, then that means faith communities need to be established.
Yes.
Faith footprints need to go to another level. We need to figure out how to reach into the lives of our kids with content that we really believe will influence them for good.
Yes. And as a perfect example, I was working with a church, very large church. They have like 10, 15,000 members. And their youth pastor was feeling discouraged because they would have a youth Bible study at the church every other week. And like at first 50 kids were coming, but then it went down to like 7 or 8. I said to him, listen, I want you to try to just launch a youth group, a youth Facebook group, and I want you to go live in that group and see how many young people will tune in. And he said to me, well, nobody's going to tune in because youth aren't on Facebook. I said, they're there. They're just not posting because their parents are there, but they're there. He did this. He went live and 500 young people tuned in.
Really?
From like 7 or 8 that were showing up at the building. So really? I say that because I think social technology really does provide a way to get back to the biblical form of ministry, which again is meeting people where they are, but doing it at scale. Like now you have 500 people, many of which didn't even go to that church. They just tuned in because their friends were watching or they got invited to the group by their friend. And so it presents a lot of opportunities as well.
You bet. Now, let's go back to where we started. Here's a girl with a story of brokenness and where you're at now. Can you just kind of tie all these pieces together? And what's your prayer as you look forward?
My prayer is, for one, this is why I'm releasing my memoir. I'm releasing my book because I want people to know that no matter how dark your circumstance may be, the light of Jesus is brighter. And I know from personal experience that when it seems absolutely hopeless, when it seems like there's no purpose to go on, when it seems like all of the trauma is meaningless, it has meaning. I look at my life now and I see that all of the people who have heard my story, and I've had so many people even come to me and say, thank you for sharing your story because that happened to me too, and I've never told anyone. I can see how the light of God created purpose out of my pain. And so when I think back on that little girl, my heart breaks because I know when I was in the thick of it, I didn't see a purpose. And Lord, what would have happened if my attempts at suicide would have actually worked? I wouldn't be sitting here with you today. I wouldn't have the opportunity to encourage people who are feeling desperate. So I am so grateful for God giving me beauty for ashes, because he has truly, truly done that.
We will pray that God continues to bless you and use you, especially in this role at Facebook. Nona, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This was wonderful.
Well, this is Roger Marsh, and I pray that you have enjoyed this informative and encouraging edition of Family Talk. Be sure to visit our broadcast page at drjamesdobson.org to learn more about Nona Jones and her kingdom work at Facebook. Simply go to drjamesdobson.org and then click onto the broadcast icon. Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Family Talk. We greatly appreciate you joining us for each and every program. Next week, former U.S. Senator Tom Coburn stops by to update us on the Convention of States project. Then you'll hear a classic message from Dr. David Jeremiah, pastor at Shadow Mountain Community Church. I hope you'll be with us for each of these programs every day next week, right here on Family Talk. I'm Roger Marsh. Have a blessed weekend.
This has been a presentation of the Dr. James Dobson Family Institute.
This is Dr. Tim Clinton. Thank you for tuning in today for this edition of Family Talk. Our ministry here exists to honor the Lord through ministering to today's families and marriages. We couldn't accomplish that, however, without your support. And as the JDFI, the James Dobson Family Institute, continues to grow, we need your help. Visit us, will you do that, at drjamesdobson.org, or call us toll-free at 877-732-6825. Stand with us and fight for righteousness and culture.